couple topics on here. Big one, obviously, is this RGW one. I have some smaller one. We'll get to it if we get to it. No, it's not a big deal. Yeah, we have the multi-site stuff. So, Reddit, do you want to go over intro it, I guess, you had proposed here?
Yeah, I updated the pad, so maybe I can just share my screen.
For me.
This one. Can you see the pad?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so basically, as part of 5.3, correct me if I'm wrong, Adam, please. We need to add support for RGW multi-site configuration in Ceph ADM. Right now, in order to configure RGW, you have to perform several steps manually using the RGW admin binary, and it is a little bit cumbersome. So the idea is to put all this configuration in Ceph ADM to make it easier for end user to configure RGW multi-site. So there was a tracker opened by Sebastian 1 year ago, and here he put some ideas about how this could be implemented. And the main idea he introduced in this tracker basically is to add a new layer on top of service type to distinguish between specs. So right now we have service spec, generic service specs to cover different services that we support on Ceph, and another class that represents the host spec. So Sebastian idea is to add this new top layer with the keyword kind, where you specify what's the type or the kind of the spec. So in this case, instead of using service type, for example, to specify the host, it will be much clearer to use kind host. And here he puts an example of the spec that we'll discuss later. Yeah. So this is from one side. On the other side, I inspect a little bit the source code to see what we have right now. So in the Python common deployment, we have different classes for the specs that we support as before. Host spec, which is declared in separate file. Host placement spec, server spec, which is the base class for all the different specs that we support, all of this. And then in the interface.py in the orchestrator model, we have this small function that receives a JSON, and it generates the object from the JSON, either host spec or service spec, depending on the JSON. And in the output we have this generic spec class, which is union between both classes. So this is more or less the current situation. My idea is similar to what Sebastian proposed at the beginning, but I have some doubts about how can we implement it. So my idea is to add a generic spec to cover, for example, Ceph ADM spec or generic spec. I don't have a clear preference. We can use generic spec or Ceph ADM spec. I prefer the second one little bit more than the first one because it relates to Ceph ADM clearly. And this will be like the base class for all the different specs that we will support in Ceph ADM, including service spec, host spec, and all the different new RGW objects and items that we'll need. So we'll have this keyword kind or type or whatever we want to call it that will specify what is the type of the spec. It could be service host, deployment, RGW, whatever. And it will be extendable in the future if in case we added any new types. Okay. This is an example extracted from the tracker introduced by Sebastian. Yeah. So reading a little bit and analyzing this spec introduction tracker, I think Sebastian idea was to include like separate items like this one, for example, to create the realm. I will go to the tracker directly. So this one will be to create the realm. This one will be create to the zone, and this one for the service. So I think his idea was to create like each element separately, and then when you arrive to the service, you just check that you already have check somehow you already have this realm and this zone, and in the case of zone group created. I'm not sure if this is good or bad. The other alternative would be like putting the information, all the information related to the RGW in this entry, and then use the information about the realm, the zone, and the zone group to create the different stuff that we need. First alternatives seems more flexible, as you can put whatever you want for these entries, and in the future maybe we can extend it by more fields in case we need to. The other alternative, like putting everything under this entry, maybe at some point it becomes very complicated to handle all the fields or all the information we need for the multi-site. These are like the pros and cons I see for both of them. Then other things that we have to keep in mind, like the RGW elements creation must be done in a specific order. So if we go with the alternative to have separate entries, then we have to ensure that we are creating things in the right order. So first we have to create the realm, then the zone group, then the zone. So we cannot just go and process all the YAML spec one by one. So in that case, maybe if the user just has put the things in different order, it will fail, and it won't be user friendly to fail just because the user hasn't put the things in the right order, in my opinion. Yeah, the check could be challenging also to make sure that he has included everything. It is more minor issue, type an issue in case we introduce some new base class. We have to make sure we are handling the type propagation in the code properly. And the other is to ensure backward compatibility of specs. I think right now we are using default realm, default RGW for everything. That shouldn't break, but we have to make sure that we are not breaking old functionality. I'm not missing any existing RGW installation, for example. In case of upgrades and in case of the users already have like the realm created, we shouldn't mess with what the user already have. So this is more or less what I collected related to this topic. I will continue. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say so. What my initial thoughts is the most important thing that I guess I'm worried about is the backwards compatibility. Like I know when I was looking at say Tracker with the service types and stuff,
Mhm.
um, like even like the looks like the host specs are even a little bit different in this proposal. Um, I'm worried even if like it wasn't the problem, say if we could like migrate the specs that already exist, it's just sort of I don't know, annoying, I guess, for the users if we just change the way you have to format like the specs like that. Because it's been a few years now. I think they've looked sort of like this.
Yeah.
Um, so if it was possible, basically in any way, to make it so that the old specs still work the same uh, while we do this stuff, I would pretty much always go for that.
Yeah, I would say that's nearly mandatory at this point. People now have their collections of files and stuff, and you know, I even say at the very least one version should be able to consume the older style of YAML, 100%. It shouldn't be required to provide this field.
Yeah, we shouldn't ask them like to convert their specs to the new format. That will be a
So
pain in the neck for the
if you
users.
if you don't mind me, I'm gonna talk for a moment. So two big things jump out at me. One is I generally like the idea, but of course this is making Ceph ADM even more like Kubernetes, especially with the use of the word kind. Um, so I'm not sure how familiar you are with
Um,
Kubernetes
uh,
concept of GVK.
just to add
So
it
if
on
you
this
want,
point, I just to add it on this point before we continue, I think Sebastian selected the word kind because can you see this is the
yep,
rook
yep,
spec, and they are using kind for the
yes,
same or similar thing. I think he
yep,
borrowed the word like for anybody familiar with rook to be
right.
able to. I think
So
it
so
comes from
leave,
there.
leave that tab up on your screen for a moment, and I want to just kind of
Yeah, yeah,
let let you understand. So for those who haven't worked a lot with Kubernetes, the two first fields there are very important. API version and kind together create something called a GVK. GVK stands for group version kind. So an API version, the thing before the slash, so in this case, ceph.rook.io is the group. The thing after the slash is the version. In Kubernetes, they're typically stuff like V1 or V1 Alpha 1. That's not super relevant. The point is, together, the three make like a three tuple to uniquely identify a resource. So, um, and because resources usually come as a group, that's why its API version is one thing, and then kind of distinguishes the individual resource types that come um, through the group and version. Which is all to say that it's a very important for Kubernetes because Kubernetes allows you these days to define your own resources. So Rook is defining resources. Other operators and controllers are defining their own resources. Ceph ADM doesn't need to be that generic, but the reason they did this is because it allowed them to make backwards incompatible changes. So if one day they decided there would no longer be, pull, um, then you would say change the API version to V2, and you would, no longer have to support the pull field. Um, that's just an example. So does that all make sense?
yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know how far Sebastian was thinking, whether he thought that there would be a need to support cube-like behavior. I don't know. Um, I'd say the interesting part is versioning and the kind stuff. So one other thing is, depending on how much you want to make this like Kubernetes, is like if you want to use the word, there's good things to using the word kind, which is like familiarity. If you've used say Rook, you're like, oh, kind, it's kind of equivalent to what Kubernetes does. On the other hand, it's not going to be exactly like Kubernetes. So there's a risk where if you use the word kind, it'll confuse people because it's not going to be exactly like Kubernetes. I just
Yeah.
want to throw that out there. If you ever have any questions about cube behavior, don't hesitate to ping me.
Okay, thanks, John. Yeah, I see. I mean, I made the comments because I think in this tracker, not sure if on this tracker or another one, Sebastian mentioned that Rook team is has already working on something similar. I mean, he put a
Right.
link to this entry, you know.
So that is a good question. If the Rook is already doing RGW multi-site, we should look to see what's going on there. I'm not saying they need to be 100% compatible, but it might be worthwhile to know what they did.
Yeah. So this is like the main configuration page they have, and from this, I think they are using similar entries as Sebastian puts on the spec. I mean, they are creating separately each object, what they call here Ceph object, and then whatever realm zone group.
Oh, this is literally I didn't catch because it's called Ceph object and not RGW. I didn't realize right away that's what it was. Okay.
Yeah. This is exactly the spec they use on Rook. So they call them Ceph object and then whatever zone group, and then
The
zone.
other thing you said that I want to point out is the order. That would be now. I don't know what Rook is doing. If the order matters to Rook, then they have a bug because the Kubernetes declarative approach is very much like it shouldn't matter what order the CRDs were created in because the reconcile loop should take care of that for you.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I know from the basic investigations I did on RGW, in order to create stuff, you have, for example, if you want to create the zone group in realm, first you have to have the realm, obviously.
At the RGW layer, that might be the case, but when you're talking about declarative config like the Kubernetes style, if we're going to copy the Kubernetes style, we should copy the Kubernetes style and not have the order matter. So basically, the orchestrator would not maybe make any changes until it had all the information it needed.
Yeah, that was the points basically from my comments. I mean, like here, for example, if the user introduced this spec and, for example, puts the zone before the realm internally in CephEDM, we shouldn't error because the realm goes after the zone. Should be more clever and process first the realm, then the zone to be more user friendly because spec and is correct. But that will require more processing on the CephEDM side, obviously.
Right.
So here they have something similar. I think Sebastian just looked at these entries and he copied something similar on CephEDM because here, as you can see, this is the zone group, and then in the spec he linked to the realm, to the corresponding realm.
Yeah.
And then zone at some point. Here's the zone. Then the zone group. Yeah, he linked to the zone group at this point, and the zone group is linked to the realm.
As far as the ordering and stuff goes, the way I was sort of imagining us handling these things is that the kind of way we have that apply services, we'd also have like some other apply thing that runs before that. And then it would go through whatever specs we have for these types of resources. Like if we have a zone group spec and a zone spec, it would always do the realm ones first, and then it would do the zone ones and the zone groups. And then it would make sure that all that stuff's always done in that order, and it would be done before the services, so we never have to worry about how anything's stored. And basically, it would just try it, and then if it fails, it would say raise a health warning or something, saying like I couldn't make this one. If it succeeds, I mean, what I sort of thought in my head was that it would just sort of get rid of the spec at that point, because this should only be a one-time thing. So we just make the thing, and then we're sort of done with that spec. Get rid of it. And if not, if it fails, then we keep the spec, but we raise the health warning to say like we want to make this thing for you, but we can't.
Mm-hmm. And do we have support like to process this stuff in different order?
I mean, we could just save. I mean, like, so this is like one big spec. We could just save them all as a bunch of separate specs, and then
Mhm.
we just essentially like the way you can search right now. You can search like by like a service type, whatever, when you're looking for specs. We'd have to have some way of searching for like the type of spec. I guess the kind. How they say it here. I mean,
Yeah.
like, I want to get all the RGW realm specs, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to try to create all those realms. And I'm going to get all the RGW zone ones and so on. And that would be a separate thing that happens before we make any services. Because if there is an RGW service that's depending on these, then that has to be made after these zones and zone groups and stuff. So
Yeah.
I don't think it would be a big problem. I think you just have to write some separate functionality that runs first that just goes through each of these types and make sure to do them in the right order.
Yeah. It's something that we have to solve somehow, and we may have like a lot of entries of this kind in different order and different relationship between the realm, the zone groups. So we have first to make sure that the structure is correct before creating anything. Otherwise, we may end up like with partial creation, like we have the realm, but then the zone or the zone groups were not created because they are not correct. So I think we should make it kind of atomic. If it succeed, then it succeeds for everything. If it fails, then we shouldn't have like to roll back to delete whatever realm has been
Right.
created.
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't deploy services until all the other pieces have been satisfied.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing is you could do certain things lazily, right? Like if you create, I don't know enough about multi-site, but like suppose that you submitted the YAML for zone here. That's the only thing you did. Well, if there's no services backing that zone, do we need to do anything? Maybe it doesn't do anything until it sees an RGW service that's going to make use of those things.
Mhm. I don't know if we have support in this the FADM for this. Adam, you know more the code.
For checking if we have an RGW that uses a zone. I mean, we could do it. We could go through all the specs we have that are RGW type. We could look, see if any of them have a zone specified. So we do let them specify. I think we let them specify a realm and a zone, but not a zone group currently in the spec. I think there's actually a tracker somewhere for
Yeah.
specifying zone groups as well. Not sure why that
Yeah.
got left out.
Anyway, John, I mean, this is good idea, but we may have the problem that in case you do it lazily, maybe you fail very late
True.
because whatever field in the zone was not correct, and you will not warn the user as soon as possible that the spec he was
Yeah.
just trying to use is not correct.
Yeah, totally. I agree. The issue is I don't know enough about the specifics of RGW multi-site to make a guess at whether
Yeah.
like should this be treated as an active thing, like a service. A service is turned into running processes. Is the realm or the zone more like a config file, so more of a passive thing where it can be kind of brought together and then applied to
The thing
um,
is, Realm can have different zone groups, and
mhm.
each zone group can have different zones. So normally first you create the realm, and then within this realm, the realm is kind of namespace.
Mm.
So every realm is unique, and within the realm, then you create different zone groups. One of them must be the master, and then within each zone group, it creates zones.
Mhm.
I think you have
Yeah,
to follow this order.
sure. Yeah, like I said, it kind of depends on whether this is like an active property of the system or
Mhm.
more of a passive property of the system, whether you can apply it lazily or not. And I don't know. What I should do is if we're going to have this conversation again, is we should probably all read up at least on the docs, the official docs, and how to
Yeah,
do it manually. So then we are a little bit more aware of what the
I can
bits of
share.
RGW are.
can share later with you the documentation I read. I don't have it at hand right now. Yeah, I can share it later with you so everybody can at least read the
Yeah,
basics so we can have the same
agreed.
discussion with more context.
Yeah. So I generally think the idea of having a unified hierarchy for the actual resource types is great. My questions are basically, is the structure that Sebastian proposed make sense for RGW in the Ceph ADM context, and is it even necessary to implement RGW multi-site? I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it. I'm just saying we should at least think about whether these are orthogonal tasks or Sebastian kind of glued them together because it appealed to him.
I think the need right now is basically in order to configure RGW multi-site, we have to issue a lot of different commands to create the realm, to create the zone groups
Mm-hmm.
manually, and then use Ceph ADM at the last instance to create the servers. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe this kind of we have an administration tool which is Ceph ADM, but
Yeah.
it is used partially. So it's from user
I'm
perspective, it
I'm
is
just hypothetically, and I'm not saying we should do this, but I want to understand, like, if say everything could be put into today's RGW resource, maybe it would be ugly or clunky or whatever, but if it's doable, then we need to at least consider the fact that the group stuff or the kind stuff might be cool. It might not be strictly necessary either.
I mean, it's definitely possible to throw it all in there. We could just
Yeah.
have a really big RGW spec that has all the things listed. We could just, like, we could already list the realm and zone and stuff there. We could just add some functionality that just tries to create it for you first if it doesn't exist yet, and
Right.
that could be all it does.
yeah.
That's a possible way to do this. That's definitely
Yeah,
that would work.
as I said at the beginning, that's another way to go with this. The
Right.
risk in that case is that if they start adding more functionality in the future, so maybe at some points this entry will become huge with
Right.
a lot of configuration that would be hard to maintain.
Right. And so the whole idea of adding kinds is to make the
Please,
YAML specs more generic and flexible in the future. But
exactly.
my point is, we need to decide whether we want to make it a requirement or we just say, oh, well, they're both good things, but we can do RGW multi-site in the short term without it and come back and do this later. I don't know. I'm throwing that out there because
Yeah.
I've been on lots of projects where people blob stuff together, and it's because it sounds cool, and I'm just like, okay.
Yeah. You're right. That depends. I think if we had some more input from product management, like what kind of features they foresee, like in the next year and next 2 years, so we can have
Right.
more information if we'll be adding more functionality to this, or it would be just like this, just to grade the basic. I mean, if it is just to grade the basics, then maybe it's easier just to put whatever information we need in this RGW service spec and go with it. It will be
Yeah.
much more easy.
What you're
But
talking about is sort of like a downstream thing. I can say with what I've talked to with them, because obviously that's where this is getting sort of pushed from. But it should be good, useful for upstream as well. Is they almost just want to be able to sort of do this in less steps. I think is the important thing to them right now, because it just, as you were saying earlier, it's a lot of steps to go, create all the things, do all that. And I think it's just more just making this a bit easier to deploy because it is annoying to deploy. I've done it before. I've deployed multi-sites and it takes a while. There's a lot of steps to it, so this would just make it easier. I don't think they care too much how we do it. I think they just want it to work. I think this stuff where we're saying like, oh, we're going to do this is more what do we want, what do we like better in our thing. That's
yeah, the thing that if we go with this, let's see, the simple way, just put everything in this service. If at some point later we want to change this flexible scheme, then we have to be backward compatible with whatever we introduce in the first implementation.
Right. So getting back to my earlier point, if we implement kinds, we should at least also implement versions. We can probably ignore groups because that's not Ceph ADM is not going to be Kubernetes and not going to be that specific. But if we do versions, then at least you can say, oh, well, this is a kind of, RGW thingy 1 versus version and kind RGW thingy version
Yeah.
2.
Yeah. That was the last comments I put here in super
Yep.
functionality. Should we add a new version field to the spec? I was thinking in the same line as your comment right now, if it makes sense or not. Maybe
Right.
it is good idea to have something there. So this way we detect if we are on version 1 or whatever, and then process the spec accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think probably we have discussed like the most basic stuff, and we discussed the different alternatives. But I feel that we need to have more discussion related, but with more context maybe.
Mm-hmm.
What we could do in the meantime, because I assume this will just come up in the weekly next week,
Mhm.
for that. If you're still looking at this stuff, we could do is, because this is mostly almost a front end discussion. It seems to be where all the talking points are. Um, what you maybe could do is try to do the sort of the back end stuff. Like, so we were saying before, there's gonna be like some function before the apply services that, like, does all this stuff. Maybe you could just do like whatever the simplest possible front end is. Like, maybe that is just shoving everything in the RGW spec and just have some like sample stuff or whatever, and then we can see like this is how it would work in the back end. Like, what kind of front end do we really want around this? Um,
Yeah.
just maybe
Yeah.
so we can get the full picture of what we're doing, and then it also, because one thing with I guess if we like finalize doing it one way in the front end is you have to then worry about, well, as soon as anyone starts using that, we now have to support it like almost not forever but for a while, even if we do want to change it. So I kind of want to make that decision almost like last, like, decide everything, like how it's going to work behind the scenes, and then what we're going to actually do, and then at the very end, all right, what's actually the best sort of front end way to handle this, just so, because then that's the part that it has to always stay the same almost, or has to keep being supported. So do that at the end.
We can assume, for example, that in the Ceph ADM service, in the RGW spec, we have all the information we need to create the service and just go and create everything we need, like rearm the zone. Then how this information is populated, this is something that we have to decide how it's end up in the service spec. Do you follow?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's almost exactly what I was sort of thinking is that we'll figure out all this stuff, and then at the end we'll figure out what's the best way to present this to people and everything, so that we can do that correctly.
We can start like working on the basic commands to create the realm, the zone group, especially from Ceph ADM. We have to call this Radus Gateway admin binary.
Word of warning on that is that if there are no OSDs in your cluster, that command just hangs forever. So you have to probably implement some sort of timeouts.
Really?
Yes. All the Radus Gateway admin commands do that. They will hang forever if there's no OSDs. So most people in their clusters have OSDs, but we do have to be aware of it, that we have to have timeouts on all of those, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm assuming ultimately we'll, in the short term, yeah, sure, we can reuse an existing tool, but it would make probably sense to either have the logic in APIs, because I'm assuming it's not doing anything magical. It's either creating Rados objects or whatever just to configure everything. And so, we probably don't want to add like a container just to run that one command.
No, it's not container. It's called to the binary directly.
I know, but to call the binary, I need to call it from something. I don't want to see a bunch of shellouts inside of like a manager module or something. Doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense, in my opinion.
I'll also add, I don't know what's in here, but there is an RGW manager module that somebody made. late last year. I don't know what's in it, but it could maybe have some stuff we want. I know the thing I linked you before, Redo. Here, I'll put it in the other pad actually. In case
Yeah, I wasn't aware of this model in the manager.
I just put the link in there in the pad.
Okay.
I maybe it's even possible that we end up deciding instead of implementing stuff the way we're doing it before, because I know that's the way what I linked you before was something that Dan did a long time ago, where it was just actually doing basically what John was talking about, where he just like run these little sub-process commands that go and run Radio Gateway admin commands, and it was very ugly, and that's part of why maybe we removed it.
Yeah.
But because this module exists, maybe there's a possibility of getting that sort of functionality in there. So that's like the module where you do all like the ugly stuff to make these Radio Gateway admin commands work, and then we could nicer one. We maybe could contribute to that. But I have to see what's actually. I don't know if you know what's in there. I haven't looked at the RGW module at all.
Yeah.
Right. And that's definitely where it comes down to what is it actually doing, and what are the the details do matter at some point.
I can say a very quick look at it. I do see it doing RGW admin stuff. So maybe we could actually make good use of this this module. And the
Yeah,
same way
if-
that we use the NFS module, it uses the Orchestrator module to do stuff. We could maybe have the CPDM module use the RGW module.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah. And definitely, if we can use some API from this model to do whatever we need related to RGW, that will be much more cleaner. Just throwing shells on processes.
Yeah. And if they're doing some super duper hyper complicated C++ stuff, and we want to still use it from Python, we can always ask for help to make a new like PyBind for those function calls.
I think that's what this module is actually. This RGW module I linked in there. I think it looks like it's a Python module that is supposed to
You can
let you
open
run
it.
Rados Gateway admin commands and things like that.
This is
Right.
the model. Can you see it? I open it on the browser.
Yeah, they list on a little bit. I don't know how. There's a thing right down here that's doing like a CLI command, kind of like we do with like everywhere else, where it's a CLI command. It's doing like RGW admin,
Mhm.
and you can like pass other stuff. Just a little
Seems
bit.
very tiny
Yeah, right
file.
here.
So yeah, RGW admin. Yeah.
So this type of thing might be.
Yeah, but it's showing
know.
up to the binary. It's terrifying. Oh dear.
So it will end up calling the binary at some point. Realm
Yeah.
zone create remove.
There's an
Zone
option between
create-
that
zone
and making
creates.
sub-processes.
Yeah.
Maybe it would just be good to look in. Maybe we need somebody to just look at this module and figure out how it works. So,
Yeah.
if it
I
does
don't know.
does exist, I would like to use it over running.
Yeah, we should
Yeah.
certainly use it. I have a pet peeve about that, so you can probably take what I say with a grain of salt. But what this basically means is we got this long-running manager process that happens to require this other process to do all of its work for it. Yeah,
It's kind
I'll
of
shut up now.
ugly.
It's something that doesn't need to be fixed right away.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
This is what we
the
kind of
alternative-
know. What? Keep going. Right?
Yeah, I was just saying that the alternative would be like implementing the API or whatever this Rados admin gateway uses to communicate with the monitor
Hmm.
in this manager model, but that would probably be a bigger effort that we have to consider.
Yeah. And part of the problem with doing that is I feel like that's what this is supposed to be almost. So we'd almost be re-implementing the same thing inside of somewhere else. So even if we wanted to fix something like that, maybe we want to fix this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like if we use this as kind of API with RGW, then if we have to change something, then we just change it here in this model without affecting our code in Ceph.
And looking a little bit closer at it, it seems like this module is actually just this one file. This is the entire module. There's nothing else to it. It's just these CLI
Right.
commands. So we can learn the entire thing in about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Figure out what we want to do with it.
Yeah. Actually, it also has apply RGW. I don't know what it does.
I assume it's calling the orchestrator reply RHW. Yeah, that's what the NFS module does the exact same thing.
Okay. And then Orchestrator will end up calling the Ceph idiom.
Yeah, or a rook. I mean, what's behind.
Or rock, yeah.
So this is yeah, the NFS module is the same. So I guess we could sort of, I guess they'd be using each other a little bit.
Yeah.
Not sure if anyone's actually using this module right now. I know it's been here for 7, 8, 9 months, but I don't know. Yeah, I guess we can start here though. We can start with figuring out this back end stuff and how we're going to do the commands and everything, and then we'll finish up with the front end discussion. Had a bit more time to think about it because I think that's again actually this oddly enough the more important one because that's the one that's harder to change once it's put in.
Yeah. Yeah. And then maybe if meanwhile you can get more information from product management in downstream to see what plans do they have for RGW multi-site support in the near term. If they will be adding more functionality or not, just checking them and see if they have something in mind or basically they have
I can
nothing.
ask, but I think the most likely thing that will end up coming out would be that they want it to be easier to do, and then once people start using it, then they will find out there's things missing or things they want, but we won't know what those things are until they try it.
Yeah.
We're almost going to be forced into, I think, to like a best effort first attempt, where we just try to like make it easy to set up a basic multi-site thing, and then people will try it to be like, oh, I want to be able to do this, whatever. I think that's what happened with this Ansible deployments as well. They get started off more basic and they add a bunch of stuff. To her was very painful, but hopefully we can avoid most of it. And
Yeah, like then customers will start asking for more features, more options.
when people start using it, then we'll know what they want. But it's hard to say beforehand.
Yeah.
But I think what we're doing here, where we're just trying to create the realm zones, is definitely a good start. And then I'll have to look again at the steps to make the multi-site and see if there's something else maybe that we should be doing, or if this is as far as we should go.
Okay.
I have to look more at what the things actually are.
Okay, great. And then I think we are on the same page. We can start. Well, I can start working on the backend stuff. I will have more deeper look to this model to see what it does and if we can use it. Otherwise, I will just try to add the functionality in the same model, whatever I need. And then we can postpone the discussion for the front end for the next week. Meanwhile, I will be sharing the links that I consulted to get some basic information about the RGW. You can have more context.
Okay. That works for me.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Better presenting all that stuff.
Yes, I think we have pointed out everything that we have discussed here.
I do have one other random topic at the very end. The C group
Okay.
split thing.
Yeah, here. Okay.
Yeah, so I'll just mention it briefly. So this was a tracker issue that popped up last week or something. There's this guy who he can't deploy his OSDs. I think it's something maybe the implement or distribution thing. Maybe I know he's on like a Rocky Linux, whatever. I don't know the details of why exactly it doesn't work, but I know that he cannot deploy any OSDs because it's getting him this. It's on the tracker, but it's giving him some error. Let me go find it. Error could not find cgroup mount in proc/self/cgroup. And so because we put that in everywhere, automatically, if you have a podman version or a podman above a certain version, you just can't deploy anything on that host. It seems like he has a mixture of different hosts of OS types in his cluster for some reason, but at least on this one in particular, you can't.
Is this something we support? We should support?
Officially, I don't. It's like Rocky Linux. I don't think we officially support anything, but
No,
like
I mean
like
having
that,
different OSs on the different nodes.
I have no
Well, at a
idea.
certain point, we
Probably
have
not.
to, because otherwise you can never upgrade incrementally. The question is, what's the size of the difference?
Mhm.
like I said, otherwise, if you can't have some sort of basic mixture, then you can never upgrade.
Yeah,
So
I
I
guess.
think the question is, what is he doing something weird, or is it like a natural blocker because distro
Yeah,
X changed something?
I don't think he did anything. I think he just like upgraded his cluster, and then one of the hosts it's like failed to deploy the OSD during the upgrade, because it hit this error about the procs,
Right.
the C group stuff. Um, yeah. So my question was not necessarily about the distro itself or why the issue came up,
mhm,
but more about what should be done about it. So I linked in there some potential pull request fix, and it basically just copied the way we fixed the or the init container or whatever the flag was called. Um, I think it, and basically all it does is it just gives you a config option, and then we have some other option in Ceph that'll say like I won't use this flag, and so then it'll deploy all the containers without the flag.
okay.
So it's very simple patch. It just and it, you just turn the
Yeah.
config option on, and then it should if you just as soon as you redeploy the containers, they should be deployed without this. And it should fix the problem. Um, I guess the question I sort of had is this the way we kind of want to go forward? Because I feel like if we keep doing this, where you slowly like, oh, well, let's add this flag in this container because it's good and whatever, and then we find out later it doesn't work on certain people, we're gonna have to do the exact same thing again, where you just add a new flag that says now we're not gonna tell you like don't use this thing.
Right.
And can we eventually come to some generic way of handling situations like this, or are we stuck just you have to be really careful, I guess, adding new automated flags into things.
Question related. In case you omit this flag, what is the effect?
So this, I forget. So some guy, some outside contributor actually added this in for us. It's something about its resources, the resources containers use, the way that they're split up in like the C groups. I don't know the details of how it works.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, so I think the issue is we're trying to be clever and like, oh, we added this non-default thing, which doesn't actually work for everybody. Now we find out.
So actually, to weave all this back, there was a regression of that was fixed by something else that caused the regression. That was later fixed by something else because of regression, and we were basically splitting log lines in journal D. So like when the output of the log to the container would come out, if it wasn't exactly on a 4K boundary, it would split and mangle it, and they were unreadable. And so we added this as part of some fix-up in the PR. But however, like, if you can see this commit that I pasted into the tab, that was the original issue against Conmon that we had logged. I think Sage had finally come up with a reproducer and everything, and it looks like Corey submitted a fix recently that appears to fix this regression. So there's a possibility we could drop this flag altogether.
I remember an issue related to this. The freedom many bugs. Do you mean this issue? Oops. This one? Or it is not related?
So, Mike, so you said this was about logging?
Okay.
Yeah, let me get the original tracker here.
See, I'm looking at the Podman man page, and it doesn't say anything about logging. It says the split option splits the current C group into two sub-C groups, one for Conmon and one for the container payload.
Right, yeah, that was part of the fix because they were changing the way they were handling logging.
That's wild.
Yeah, it was quite a path. Let me get the original tracker. I have it here.
I will stop sharing.
Yeah, okay, here we go. I'll paste this into.
Yes. Meanwhile, Mike searched for the yeah. My concern was just basically to be clear about what is the effect of disabling this flag if we give the option to the user,
I mean, it
because
sounds
he
like
has
it's
to
gonna
disable it
mess
for
up their
all
logging, maybe.
the containers, not only for one of them.
Yeah.
But if we go to a new enough podman, this regression might be fixed in Conmon, or a new enough Conmon, it might be fixed everywhere. We could just bump the revision up and then drop the fix. So if you look at that tracker, you can see there's a
Did you
link
post
to
the
a PR
tracker?
of a
Did you put it on the pad or on the chat?
It's on the pad.
put on the pad, so
Okay.
49551.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. There's regression introduced by blank, which is a fix done by myself, which was to fix an regression done by Adam in a different PR. And then they have, yeah. So all the way down, there's finally like a workaround PR and stuff. And that's where the C group split was introduced. We're going to change the way we handle logging through journal D to containers. Um,
Yes.
but
Coming
yeah,
back
it's
to
quite
it.
a change. Yeah.
I remember this. Yeah, this is the person I was talking about. I said the outside person. I don't know how to pronounce their username, like who98. I do remember they were the ones who made this, and I remember not really understanding exactly what it was doing, but that we needed it for something. Yeah, I do also remember now, yeah, because the C groups or the Ponmon thing with like that was with the type equals forking. I think originally started it way back.
Yep. Yep.
I
And then I
remember this
switched
slowly. This stuff.
Podman over to journal D, which then caused a different problem. And then, yeah.
I do remember this mangled logs thing though. Yeah, it just starts printing like new lines everywhere and stuff. But,
So
yeah.
so disabling this may break logging.
That's correct. It may, if we don't have the right Conmon version. But looking at the original root cause, the issue that Sage had opened against Cogmon, it looks like they had fixed it earlier this year, or Corey did for us, which was kind of them. So maybe it's no longer an issue.
Mhm.
Do we know which version of Kanban this would have gotten into, and like which Podman versions those are attached to?
So looking at the very last link I put in the pad there, it looks like it's tagged from 213 to 210, right towards the top by the branch. So I think anything Conmine greater than 210, I believe.
I need like a matrix for like Kanban versions, Podman versions to the OSs or something at this point.
Right, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, maybe we can drop it. We'll have to like I guess look really closely at what versions we support. I don't know if we'll be able to do it for Quincy, like we'll be able to have a backport dropping it, but we support some slightly older OSs there that might have some older Podman versions. Especially just got fixed last year. But maybe for like R, we can go and look at this, see if this is even necessary now.
Then we can just go and drop the flag.
Yeah. That doesn't really change, I think, in my eyes, the need for this current workaround thing, that pull request to have it be configurable. Because this guy is trying to use Quincy, and he just can't deploy his OSDs at all. So, I mean, like, you can't, I don't know, there's not really much else to do about it. We have to sort of let him turn it off. But I don't know if we're necessarily ready to just say, like, oh, we'll just drop it now either. Like, it seems like we have to at least investigate more. But what I kind of wanted to do was get that patch in and get it backported really quickly so that he could have it fixed for 16.2 or 17.2.4 or whatever the next thing is. It's coming out, supposed to come out soon. That was the idea.
So you provide an intermediate version where you can disable the flag basically. Then later we can just drop the flag as it is not needed anymore.
Yeah, as soon as we can confirm that all of the OSs we support for this, like whatever release we're talking about, has Podman versions that are high enough that you don't have to worry about this.
We have the
anymore.
fix. Yeah.
Which again, we require. I need to like somehow figure out which versions everything connects to.
It feels like you almost want like a full like workarounds like PY just for all the different conditionals and stuff.
Yeah, that comes back to I guess the original reason I sort of posted this here because I figured this fix is going to end up going in anyway just because we need it. I want to get it for this guy for the Quincy release. But I'm almost like of how do we handle these in general? Like if we need to do this in the future, like there's some other reason, like oh, but there's another problem, we now need to add this other flag, but then this other flag is now broken on this distro, and that they'd rather them have this other problem than have the thing be totally broken. This one's need to be configurable as well. So like this could happen again, and then we just have to just keep doing this, or we just add in these flags everywhere. We could eventually also drop them. We could remove the flag at some point, the config option and all that, probably. But it is sort of a, I don't know. I'm talking about with a nice way of handling this, like generically. Like we like there's some way to like to say like, oh, just don't put this thing in, so they can customize it a bit. But I don't. It's harder. It's easier for when they adding new things, but it's hard to say a generic way to remove a flag or something like that. That's tricky.
Yeah.
Do we happen to know what version he is using on Rocky Linux? Because this is something that's why we had that huge matrix before, and we got into the same struggle of how much of the Podman interface should we be working around? Because that becomes nightmarish after a while too. And I think that's why we introduced this is our minimum version.
Yeah, I remember the Podman matrix thing.
Yeah.
Looks like his Podman is 411. I don't know if he says which Rocky Linux. We probably ask him. He's responded to me before when I posted in there.
This is. Are you
The
talking about
tracker
this matrix?
at the bottom. Oh, the matrix? Oh, that's something in our docs. We have a matrix for like Podman versions, which we support.
Yeah.
Find that one. The compatibility and stability page.
I put it in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, so we built this. Well, it hasn't been updated in a while.
Very weird metrics.
Yeah. So I don't know. There was this whole period where I feel like we just kept discovering weird Podman bugs. I mean, you've seen a couple of them. Like you looked at that tracker I know before for like the proc hooks thing.
Yeah.
So there was a bunch of things like that, and we were like, all right, this Podman version actually works. I remember we had like tried to like in tautology pull in certain repos to have certain Podman versions for our testing, so they would all pass.
Yeah, actually, we do still have some open trackers that are related with some Podman versions.
They're not even gone. Yeah, the proc hooks one still exists. I think I had ran into that like 2 days ago. So we're not far enough versions yet where that has been fixed. I think I assume they eventually fixed it, but I don't know when that's coming in.
And the problem with that with people with legacy installations, they don't want to upgrade their distro or whatever.
But this matrix is very like outdated, I think, at this point, because it only goes up like 16.2.1 is the latest version we talk about on here, and we only talked about Podman up to 3.0. Like this guy's using like 4.1.1. Like, it's just totally outside of the matrix. And I guess we should probably eventually add more rows to it, saying like, hey, it's 4.1.1 works for 17.2 onwards or something. I'd have to check what we're actually testing right now in tautology. Maybe we can add some more to this. Yeah, this whole page I think needs to be updated because we still have some other stuff in here. Well, yeah. Anyway, that's a side topic, but I don't know. We bring this up again, I guess. We'll bring up the stuff again. But I was maybe bring up in here this. Is there any good way to handle something like this, where we have this generic sort of flag that we need to add in for some reason, then it's broken for certain people, and we want it to be configurable? Can we make that in a generic way, rather than having to have a specific config option for every single time this happens? I'm not sure there actually is. That might be too hard.
I kind of hesitate to do it, but I suppose like maybe one option is we could like in the config store a list of arguments and make it modifiable on a per daemon type. It would be really ugly though.
Yeah.
And
Maybe then it's pass those. Yeah, that's kind of where I worried about, because I even thought about like maybe like they'd have some sort of list of things like, oh, don't include this, and at the very end they'll like block all those. But every time I think about these things, I'm like, oh, there's so many ways for them to like break this, and like it'll be impossible to debug like which flag did you remove and which flag did you add and whatever.
Does it make sense to have, instead of separate flags like the command line we use for Podman, so something similar to the Linux boots, where you can modify whatever we want.
I'm not sure I totally followed.
So instead of having config options for separate flags, we have a config option, which is the command line we feed to Podman. So this way, anybody can put whatever they need, and we don't need to start adding and removing config
It's kind of
options
what
for.
extra container args already is. You just add whatever flags you want. But I guess extra container args didn't exist when we added in C group split. And
Yeah, that's my point. I mean, if we had the whole command line as a configuration option, and as default we put whatever we use, then we don't have to need to add this kind of tweaks anytime we run on a similar issue.
yeah, it's just if it's something like this where it's it's broken for everyone, you kind of want it to be by default on. So because otherwise we have to basically when we were doing this release, we have to then document hey, we want you all to go and add this flag in.
Yeah, it doesn't scale for users. I agree. I think the other thing is, going back to the original issue, did he have this problem on all his systems, or it sounded to me like you were saying one of his systems was hitting this?
Yes, he upgraded his cluster, got the managers and mons upgraded, and then when they got to the OSDs, it broke down on this.
All right. I searched for that specific error, and I found one Podman issue for it, and I don't even understand half the things they're talking about regarding C groups. So I'm wondering if he's got one node that's set up weird.
Yeah, I also thought about the same thing because I have no idea. He's the first person I've ever heard of who's actually ran into this. But it's just it's so hard to debug this sort of thing. I don't know. I don't know what to do. So I thought if we just had this config option for him, I'm like, all right, it's the default's on. If no one touches it, everything's the same. But for this one guy, he can turn it off. Or I'm sure there'll be at least one other guy.
Yeah. The other thing we could think about in the future is if we need to do this command line thing, but it could be on a per host basis, we could tweak the systemd unit file to inject args from a file, an environment file. That would be a lower level debugging thing, and that wouldn't clutter all the Ceph ADM and Orchestrator module code. It would just be hey, take this environment variable and just slap it onto the end of the Podman command line kind of thing.
Yeah, that's how I do it. Manually debugging things. I'll go and add things like that.
Right.
We could have something that did it for people. I'll go add this to the unit.run file and I'll restart it. The only issues we run in with those is that if for whatever reason the manager module ever wants to restart that daemon or redeploy it, whatever, it'll just overwrite all of that. It goes away.
Yeah.
That's why I said a file. If you had a file etc, system, ceph_adm.overrides env or something, and put crap in there. I don't know. I'm definitely.
I kind of see where you're coming from. Is we could have do that. So it stays on the host. So that way it'll get applied every single time again.
Yeah, something which is resident in the host, not related to the files inside the container.
Yeah, it's definitely an idea. It's just a matter of, I guess, how do we format that anyway? Because, say for this exact case we are passing this one flag, and we want to remove that flag. How do I specify that in my file?
In this case, I think we should double check it. But in this case, since you can do dash dash, I have the man page open. You can do dash dash whatever it is. C groups equals. I think if you specify it a second time, C groups equals enabled, which is the default behavior, it'll just override the first invocation. That's no good for -v options, which are additive, but I think for an option like this, it might be fine. But we could fiddle around with it and test if that's the case.
We could try it, guys. If there's a way to do that, even if that works, where you talked about where you just add this new C groups thing in, that maybe you could actually get around this with the extra container args already.
Yeah. Oh, good point. Yeah.
Yeah. This works.
Kind of depends on the order. If it puts those extra args after the ones that we stick in through the code, then you're right. That may already work.
Yeah, I think it does them last as far as container args go, but I'd have to verify that. But I can at least check it, and I can tell the guy about it and see if it if it works for us.
Yeah.
If it fixes that, we could scrap this whole PR. I don't need this anymore. No, I was working workaround. But I'll give that a try. I hadn't even thought of. I didn't know you could do that. You could like respecify the flag and it would overwrite.
Yeah, it usually depends on the flag. Some and the command line parser, but a lot of cases, if it's like a single value, specifying it multiple times, it'll take the last one. Of course, we could get unlucky and it might just spit an error. So, yeah,
That's what I was assuming. I was like, oh, if I do it again, it'll just blame. But maybe we're lucky with this one. I'll give it a look. Give it a look, and I'll just close this other pull request if we don't need it. I'll tell the guy in the tracker.
Yeah, in the worst case, you can just reopen it and merge it.
Yeah, in the future, just do some horrible thing like have another option which takes a regex, matches any option that you want to remove from the list. That was a joke. Please don't implement that.
That was the type of thing I was thinking before. I was like, oh, this is possible, but there's so many different ways to screw that up. Like, there's no way you could ever put that in.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Yeah, we'll do that then. I'll check if the C groups enabled works.
If the command line is not line is not long, if you're considering having this command line as the option, would save a lot of this kind of situations without any new code from our side.
You mean I don't know what you mean by the command line being long.
Having
the podman run command?
The podman command line, run command line. So having all the command line as a config option. So by default we put whatever we need, and then if some user needs to add it or to remove or to do whatever with the command line, then he can do on his own risk.
That's kind of what Mike was saying before. If we could have some option that does the whole thing out for you like that, and then they could change it. We could pass that down. And it's another thing that would maybe work, but it seems like very dangerous and very ugly. And I don't know. We could do it.
In general, nobody will or nobody should play.
Hey, here's a use for the new kind thing. You have a new kind, which is host-specific flag. So your host group says, oh, add these to the host tags, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
It'll be fun to debug when it breaks them.
That's
right. Like the Linux kernel, if you want to boot with some specific option, you just modify the command line and you boot with this option.
Yeah. By the way, I just tried the specifying C groups multiple times in a row on the same run line.
Mm-hmm.
My quick and dirty test seemed to work. I don't know it actually took the option, but it didn't throw an error. So at least that works.
I don't know if there's a good way. I don't know how to check. Maybe I need to find an old version and try to do that and see if it destroys my logs. How I can find out.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could probably figure it out through proc, but that might be an hour's worth of research to figure out what to look at, to figure out if conmon and the pod are actually, or the container are actually running in different C groups or not.
Oh, C group structure kind of where to debug and understand it, as far as I remember.
You remember the initial PR when they added it in? I tried to look it up, and I
it's very complicated, yeah.
Well, I'll tell the guy about the container. Maybe he can just test it. He's one with the environment that it's broken out. He can work.
He's upstream, and he's using an unsupported distro. He should be at least willing to try things.
I'll comment on there about that, and then if it works for him, we can close this other PR. If not, I'll try to get it in real quick before the Quincy release, so this guy can use it. And then we got a lot of strange ideas about how we can maybe handle this in the future, but I think we'll leave that for another time if it's necessary.
Yeah.
Sleep on it.
All right. Well, we are already a lot over, actually. It's already 12:15. Does anyone have anything else you want to talk about here? I feel like this C groups thing, at least, I'm happy with what we've come up with.
Nothing more from my side.
All right.
I'm good.
All right, we're good. In that case, we'll end here, and I guess probably most of you people in here on the stand up on Thursday. I guess. Yeah.
Okay.